So today, welcome back Glenn Hanner. He's a good friend and a previous client of mine. Today, we're going to be focused on looking at building fundamentally a strong company. A lot of times when companies look to build a life science company, they look at their exit.
I know everyone's focused on exit strategy, but if you can't deliver on the value proposition, then you're in big trouble and you're never going to get to an exit. Everyone's going to see that it's just a cheap veneer.
You can't have a tunnel vision on the exit. Your focus needs to be on building strong fundamentals.
You really have to pause and make sure that you build everything around your customer and your audience needs. Because if you do that, you're going to have a solution that is going to work for them. You're going to have a value proposition that resonates with them. You're going to build a community and deeper relationships.
You can level up quickly, but you still need to run through all of the gates. And that's what we focus on today. Welcome to LifeSci Continuum. Let's go. Glenn, thanks for hopping on with me again.
Yeah, of course. Always happy to be here, Bill.
We talked a little bit last time. We touched on the influence of boards and investors and how that can impact what the major decisions that a company makes. And one of the things that, an investor and maybe a board drives you towards is they have their money in the company, the investors. They want to know what the exit looks like. What's your strategy? What path are you taking? And sometimes we sort of get this tunnel vision where we're focused so much on that at, unfortunately, the expense of building a strong foundational company. And I think I'd like to talk about that today because you've had some experiences there and seen some things. So yeah. I guess I would turn it over to you. What have you seen in your life where that's maybe been the case?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've seen a lot of different ways that it plays out, right? Because there's either it goes belly up, IPO, or acquisition. And I've been, I guess I'll say fortunate enough to experience all three. But I think what comes with a board, right, and investors is they've put money in because they believe in something. And so naturally they respect a return, which is fair. The trouble, I think, is when folks get so overly focused on that return. And that's the board's problem to worry about. And I don't think it should be everyone in the organization's problem to worry about, which sometimes it becomes that, especially when leadership comes back from a board meeting and says, okay, we really need to focus down on our exit strategy, right? And you keep hearing about exit strategy. And when you're doing pitches, investors want to know about it. My personal experience has been in a variety of different startups, right? Is that folks who have just a really intense focus on the exit strategy don't really spend other time and resources building a sustainable and quality business. And that sometimes while it seems like it's a quick exit, by focusing on the exit, you end up having that a longer path because you end up spending more time and effort on the exit than you do building up things that actually really matter for a business, like building out quality and incoming inspection, right? You want to make sure you're getting good parts. One example I know for sure is a company that I had a relationship with was very focused on the exit strategy very early on. And they were so focused on it that quality greatly suffered on their products because they never really spent the time to sit down and invest in the personnel, the knowledge needed, right, to get a nice, sustainable quality business. And at one point, that company basically almost went bankrupt. And when new leadership came in, they basically said, we're going to really focus in on some gaps. And they had auditors come in. Quality was one thing, R&D, right? There was all sorts of things that they're like, you know what, we need to invest in these areas of the business to make it a sustainable quality business. And I believe in doing so, you will naturally hit those inflection points that boards and investors are looking for to say, oh, you've hit this. That means that we could actually start shopping around for acquisition, or do we take this company public, right? And building out what's important to create a quality business, a quality service, product, whatever it is that you're offering your audience, right, is incredibly important. And I always get concerned when I start hearing and seeing folks get overly focused on the exit strategy, because if you're really looking down there, you're not going to see what's really in front of you.
Let's take a step back for a second. So if we look at this through the lens of a founder or an investor, there would be pushback on well, yes, we have to focus on the exit. We want to make sure that we're saying not at the expense of a good, solid company and product. And I think what would be interesting to hear about is what were some of the things somewhat specifically that maybe were overlooked that in maybe the urgency
Yeah.
to reach an exit. What were some of the key things that were missed that ended up pushing back an exit and having an impact? Because in the rush to it, you actually push it farther away because you're not addressing some key things.
There's definitely an experience I had where a product, the company really needed to launch a product that was late. It was their new flagship product. They were incredibly delayed in getting it out. There had been all sorts of development issues. Board investors, right, pushing, you have to launch it, you have to launch it. And I think, in some instances, it's very appropriate to take the ready, shoot, aim. In other instances, it's not. And I think when you're launching a product that is going to be used on critically ill patients, whatever the setting is, it's, you have to go through the proper paces. When you're doing message testing, maybe it's a little easier to, test things, right? Pilot things. And in this instance, though, not to get off track too much, is that the product was pushed to launch way too early. It was pushed to launch because they needed to be able to get revenue so that way they can move to the next step in the exit strategy. And in doing so, a product was launched that was riddled with quality issues that may have been and likely would have been discovered and found out had there been, more thorough long-term testing, took your time, really paced yourself and make sure that it was ready for prime time.
Sorry, isn't there a regulatory oversight though? How could something that maybe had so many issues get through?
A lot of things get through. Every company, I think, in the medtech field at some point will have a recall or has had a recall. If you go onto the MAUDE report, right, that's why it's like you never, bad talk a company that's had a recall because everyone has it from time to time. There's different levels of severity to it, right? But it's an imperfect system, right? Things get through. And you could test something and you could meet all of the requirements for that testing and submit it and still find 5 years later, oh, there's something that wouldn't have been teased out in any of the required testing that you need. So sometimes these things get through. Sometimes the system isn't really set up to detect them. And that's not, a jab at the FDA or anybody. It's just the nature of the system that we're working in. And so that's how I think some of these things actually get out, but it's a natural part of the industry. Sometimes you have other instances around supply chain where you have a supplier and they have a supplier and they have a supplier. And are you doing, checks with all of that? Are you going and just auditing, the first auditor or, the first supplier where you're getting a critical component from, not knowing that they're actually sourcing other things from other places. And that could be an issue. And I've actually seen that crop up at another company I was with in terms of due diligence when they were going through and having all these quality issues. They found it was essentially coming down to, some of the vendors that they'd selected and had not done, a really thorough investigation in terms of where they are sourcing some of their components from for the subassembly that was being purchased.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a lot of issues popping up there.
There was a product that I'd worked on at a company that it was another thing where it was rushed to market. It came out too soon, and they didn't invest enough in the quality metrics, or not the quality metrics, but quality individuals, and not meaning people of quality, but people who work in quality assurance. And they only had one person, and that person didn't have agency within the company. And so because of that, it wasn't being heard that, hey, I think this is a problem. And leadership wasn't hearing it. They were keeping their eye on what's the exit strategy? We need revenue yesterday. And because of that, they ended up having quality issues in the market, which caused customer dissatisfaction, a stigma about the brand. And some of these things are really hard to overcome. Brand loyalty is once somebody has a bad experience with someone, they will sometimes, no matter what, never go back, even if it was given for free, right? So these things really matter. And that elongates that whole process. How am I going to get to exit if I'm dealing with customer complaints, a stigma about our brand, calls coming in on a daily basis, all the cost of bringing product back or refunding, right, product, it can get messy very quickly.
It stacks up, I think, and there's a very, very real direct impact on revenue and all the numbers attached to that. Again, I think, sometimes what seems like the fastest route is not always the best choice.
Yeah.
Cutting corners. Do you have any other insights or thoughts about what they might have done differently, or what you might have done differently in that situation?
That's a great question, Bill. In that scenario, I probably should have been, more of an advocate and probably looked into the data myself. I at the time, it may have been that culture-wise things were siloed. Hindsight's always 2020. When you look at these things, you're like, oh, we should have absolutely done this type of testing or really gone and talked to these folks first. In general,
let me jump in. Take 30 seconds. What was your role at that time?
My role at that time was I was a marketing associate. Essentially, I was your entry level marketing position.
Okay, so you're not really at the point, and you said something interesting about the quality person earlier. They didn't have agency within the company, and we do this too. Sometimes we put a big burden on people who are new or earlier career. We have these big expectations. We're just driving towards a big lofty goal, and then we're expecting the world of them. I mean, I don't know, as an early career marketing associate, that's really your responsibility.
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, it's something where I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm off base here, but I think corporate culture has changed significantly since you and I started in this business. I think that there's been a lot of change just culturally in the country, right? There's been a lot of different movements and a lot of things that are giving more and more people agency and feeling that they can speak up. I think, being a younger person in marketing, it should have been my job, right? And I should have felt comfortable to speak up. But unfortunately, I think there's silos and also intimidation that plays a factor when you walk into these boardrooms. And, I can't tell you, even just something as simple as walking into a boardroom feels different. Like the demographics have changed so much, and you have a lot more diversity and a lot more diversity in opinion, but also in experience, which to me, the more of that you have, the better plan and the better you end up being on that back end, because you have a diversified view of what's going on.
I think that's great. And you do highlight something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, how depending on how you look at the experience bracket, some people have seen some really kind of crazy things in their careers that people just aren't seeing now, or they're seeing a much more equitable or diluted version of that, a sanitized version of that. I think there are definitely pros to that, in enabling, empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of it comes with experience, right? And part of it comes with, I think, culture. When I first started out, I always heard, as a startup, because I grew up in the startup world, right? And as a startup, our most precious, asset is our time. We have to be very careful with our time. And my opinion of that's completely changed. The most important asset any company has are their people, invest in them, listen to them. Any idea can come from anyone. That's been proven from time and time again, right? And you hear all sorts of different success stories about this came from somebody who had no idea about it, or from a janitor, or, rarely does it seem like it actually comes from a CEO, to be honest. But that's all right. So yeah, I think, change, ideas, everything, people are important. They need to be heard, and they need to feel that they're valued. And that has changed significantly, I think, over time. And I think it's going to vary depending on, the company, the industry, there's a lot of different variables, but high level, right? Overall, I feel like I'm seeing things trend in, I think, a more positive direction that now, enables and empowers people to be able to say, to a board, I know everyone's focused on exit strategy, but our product's falling apart, or it's not delivering on the value proposition. If you can't deliver on the value proposition, then, you're in big trouble, and you're never going to get to an exit. Everyone's going to see that it's just a cheap veneer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So would you, I know you have another experience that's definitely more positive in this instance, if you could sort of time travel, and go back to, earlier career could you make a recommendation to yourself? Could you say, try this, or avoid this, or keep an eye out for this sort of thing?
Yeah, I think this might be cliche, but what I'd say to myself early on is, don't worry about being right, worry about winning. And I would often get too wrapped up in, I spoke to these 10 customers and it has to be this. And if it's not this, it's going to be the worst ever because, and that's definitely the wrong attitude and mentality. It's very, very important, and something that I enjoy thoroughly now is collaborative and cross-functional work and doing it together to be able to win collectively. It's less about my personal hero's journey, right? And more about the collective journey. What are we building together? What are we going to accomplish together? And so don't worry about being right, worry about winning, and go out and make an impact and a difference.
Awesome. I think it was great that you shared a story of where maybe it didn't go as well as it could. But you've worked at a number of companies, and so you've seen it work well. So can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Absolutely. So I know at a company I was associated with, they had great struggles financially due to poor customer satisfaction, and revenue was down, right? Suffice to say. So a new leadership team was brought in, which is always scary, right? The dreaded reorg. And so it's always concerning, who's sticking around, right? What's going to happen? How's this going to change? What was really refreshing and nice was that when the new team came in, there was an abundance of focus on building out the basics of the company. What are the basic functions and areas that we can work on and improve to build and create a really solid foundation? Because at the time, it almost felt like they built a house on quicksand, right? And so let's get that solid foundation. Let's focus in on the essentials and the basics. And so that was, quality, manufacturing, tighter R&D, and those things made a huge impact and a difference. Everyone looked at complaints and customer satisfaction report. All of it was trending all in the right way. Once you started to dedicate resources and time to really build out a strong foundation and a quality product and a quality company. And so that was a really positive experience and a really valuable lesson that I took with me and I still think about today, because anytime I'm consulting or working with anyone, I think about, okay, what are the basics and foundations? I'm doing a gap analysis in my head to think, how can I help these individuals out based off of my past experience in this area?
Yeah, it really sounds like a lot of the core areas that you would think would be settled weren't. They were not maybe in good shape. How is it possible for a company to function that way? I sort of go back to highly regulated, but how is it just possible that a company can have so many things that are kind of operating at that level?
Yeah, I think it's a highly regulated industry, right? The life sciences. However, those regulations a lot of times really come down to the product performance and safety, right? Is it safe? Will it hurt folks? And how does it operate compared to standard care? But it's not really looking at, culture or how well something's being executed, right? It's looking at, do you have this documentation? Yes or no? Are these check boxes, hit? And not looking at, how was this necessarily done? And so you end up with these companies that I think that run into these issues because of two things. One is your classic kind of, founder's dilemma of an entrepreneur who understands value immediately, knows a good thing when they see it, and might not have the business acumen to really grow and scale a startup, right? And I can't imagine anything harder than letting your baby go to someone else to run, right? And so I think that happens still, even though it's been talked about to nauseum, right? But it still happens today where you get, first-time entrepreneurs or these folks who have a really, really brilliant idea, but they just don't have the know-how not because they're not intelligent people. They just haven't done it. It's an unfair expectation to expect somebody who's never been the CEO of a startup to be able to go in and do it, right? And so that's the first area that I think, happens and contributes to that issue. The second is really, it comes from, I think, leadership. If you have folks in the leadership positions who are there to help lead everyone and not manage them, but lead them in a unified path in direction, and you come up and you come together and you say, these are going to be our focuses, right? These are our strategic imperatives. These are the areas, the core areas of the business where we want to build core competencies. The amount of times that happens, I think, is rare. I think it's rare for a company to really sit down with everyone and say, what are our core competencies? What do we want to build on? where are we deficient and how can we make it better? It's everyone gets so caught in moving forward that it's easy to forget. You need to pause and to almost do like kind of a postmortem. What's working, what's not, and more importantly, why? And let's really work hard to embrace the areas that are working really well. And when you find something that's not working and you know why, then let's try not to repeat history or learn and pivot from it and say, let's try it again, but with this specific different angle of perspective. So that's how I think you could end up essentially in this space where you're like, how could it be so messy in such a highly regulated industry? Well, it happens because I think folks get defocused essentially.
We actually see that a lot. And I think when we look at the marketing function, when you strip away a lot of the details, it boils down to focus.
Yeah.
Where are you focusing your attention and your message and a lot of your resources? So that makes a lot of sense. Is
Bill,
there anything
sorry.
else? Yes.
Yeah, you said marketing function, and that for whatever reason just sparked something. For me, marketing function within any industry differs, and even within the same industry varies greatly. And that was such an important thing that I learned, is that marketing isn't equal everywhere. I grew up in environments primarily in the first half of my career where marketing was the hub, right? They did the upstream and downstream side. They were highly involved in strategy, highly cross-functional, right? Highly collaborative. And I think for 90% of the folks, which is a number I completely just made up, but it just seems that there's like an overwhelming amount of folks who are just like, marketing is marketing communications. It's picking a pretty color, it's coming up with a tagline, and with branding, it's been reduced to branding, where marketing is really much, much more than that. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. And, you asked me a question earlier about, what would you go back and tell yourself? If I'm allowed two things, that would be the second thing. It'd be like, not everyone's in your careers can view the marketing function and role the same way that you've experienced it early in your career. And when you're going and consulting for companies or going to work for them, it's important, I think, in the due diligence to find out, how does marketing interact? What is their involvement from an organization-wide standpoint? Are they the ones who are actually helping develop the strategy, or is that being handed down from the board or senior leadership and marketing just executing? It's really going to impact, I think, happiness, feeling like you're accomplishing something and working towards a unified goal versus here's something, take it and run.
We hear a lot about marketing and sales alignment, and I don't know if enough is spent talking about and exploring marketing and business alignment. And I think a big portion of that would be, how does the organization perceive the marketing function at that business?
Yeah.
Are they responsible for the trade show and the website, or are they all the way up to product and strategy? And we've seen it all. This runs the gamut. And you're right, it's a spectrum, and it's different everywhere you go. So you have to really get a good read on that when you're going in. First of all, you're probably not going to get hired if you're more on the presentation side, you're on the trade show and the website side of things. It's probably a tougher sell to get you into a product and a strategy position. But if that's where you're coming from, if you're coming from business strategy and more of the positioning and product development, you may get yourself into a situation where the company really sees you as just go take care of the trade show booth, make sure the website's up to date. And that, I think, it's a bucket of ice cold water. Have you ever experienced that?
Absolutely. I was sat in a meeting where I was weighing in on something, and someone stopped me, interrupted me, and said, I really don't understand why marketing is even in here and why they're even providing their opinion on this. And, someone else had to say, well, marketing owns this. Actually, they own the strategy of this. They're the ones who are making up and so that was, it's interesting. So it happens a lot. I mean, I've had it happen actually most frequently. I love my colleagues in R&D, but it happens most frequently, I think, with R&D, where they're like, I don't understand why this marketing talking head is telling me how to do development. And it's like, I'm not trying to tell you to do development. What I'm trying to communicate is what the market demands are, right? What the voice of customer is, translating that into, giving that to you so that it can be translated into a technical specification that you guys can test and meet. And so that's where I most commonly, see it. But it's also from a leadership standpoint, another company I was at where marketing was absolutely thought of as primarily website, right? And so it was like, well, I'm going to do the copyright for the website. And it ended up being like, well, you here's all this, we already have all the information you need. We just need, the design of it and things like that. And I was like, okay, that's not exactly my wheelhouse here. First off, I do think that everyone should go out and read this classic. I'm buzz marketing here, I guess, for a book that was written a long, long time ago. It's Kotler, right? It's his book, or not Kotler. It's Ries and Jack Trout, but it's on positioning, right? The granddad's positioning, and I read that very early in my career, and it was one of those things where I read it and I was like, man, I felt like if half the folks on senior leaderships read this, it would kind of click on a light in terms of helping them understand how the psychology behind marketing and how it could actually drive, real change and impact in market if you really embrace it. So there's my plug for a book that I think every marketer's probably read, or at least I hope so.
Yes, I think that's that's in the top 20 must reads. I think that it's one of those things that definitely doesn't get the attention that it deserves. It's sitting on a number of conversations, and people, a scientist will come in and say, I just wrote up the information on the product and we want to make sure we get a landing page up for it. And then you start digging in and you start asking questions, and like, what? I mean, we don't have that. We don't have that information. We don't know the answer to that. Why do you need that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I mean, we want to craft this in a way so that the stranger on the other end of this page or brochure wants to buy it. They're interested, and you don't have any of that here.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it comes back to how I've always been this big believer in storytelling, right? And if you get a landing page or a brochure that has technical jargon and data and insider language, that it's just not going to land and connect with your audience. If you really want to develop your audience, right, you talk to them, you find out what's important, and then you bring that narrative into your story and make that emotional connection.
Yes, we do talk about that a lot in the previous episode. So for people listening or watching, if you haven't seen or heard it, go check it out. That was definitely a good one. So Glenn, anything else before we wrap up today? This has been super.
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And, this is, a very obvious thing. And unfortunately, I feel like I have to say it, even though it's so obvious, but always build around your customers' needs. It sounds incredibly basic, but it's so often overlooked in the excitement of innovation. I've got a new shiny thing here, right? And I can't wait to get it out there. If you build it, they will come, right? And you really have to pause and make sure that you build everything around your customer and your audience needs. Because if you do that, you're going to have a solution that is going to work for them. You're going to have a value proposition that resonates with them. You're going to build a community and deeper relationships. So my big obvious thought, even though it seems so straightforward, is just always build around your customer needs.
Yeah, I wish that it was super obvious and everybody knew it. But like I said the other day, still in conversations today with people who joke, but they mean it. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
They won't come.
Yeah.
not the majority of the market, certainly not. All right, Glenn, thank you so much. It was good talking to you.
Thank you.
So if you're a life science leader or product manager and you have an interesting story you'd like to share, reach out to me on LinkedIn and we'll connect. If you're interested in learning some other lessons in marketing for life sciences or in avoiding some of the big mistakes, I cover a lot of that in my LinkedIn newsletter. So I'll drop the links to those in the description below. That's it. That's the end.